What if I told you the next global superpower battle is not about oil, not about gold, not about weapons, but about something even more dangerous: minerals? The same minerals hidden deep beneath African soil are now becoming the most powerful leverage in the world. And right now, South Africa, one of Africa's most strategic economies, may be preparing to redirect its critical mineral supply toward India. A move that could shake global markets, disrupt US industrial dominance, and accelerate a power shift the West has been trying to prevent for years. Because let's be honest, when a country controls the minerals, it controls the future. And if South Africa begins favoring India over Western partners, this is not just trade. This is a message, this is a warning, this is Africa choosing its own allies. And today, we are going to break down what is happening, why the US is extremely concerned, and how this could reshape the entire global order. Stay with me, because this story is bigger than most people realize. Welcome back to the Spotlight for 7. For decades, oil was the key to global dominance. Whoever controlled oil controlled transportation, military power, and economic influence. But today, the world is entering a new era. And in this era, critical minerals are the new oil. These are minerals like platinum, palladium, manganese, chromium, vanadium, rare earth elements, lithium, cobalt, nickel. Without these minerals, there is no electric vehicle revolution, advanced military equipment, space technology, semiconductor production, renewable energy transition, battery manufacturing, jet engines, missile systems, smartphones, satellite communications. And here is the most important part. The US and the West do not control enough of these minerals. They depend on imports. And that dependency is becoming a national security threat. Because if the supply is interrupted, factories shut down, defense systems slow down, tech industries collapse, and global influence weakens. That is why critical minerals are now being treated like weapons. Not bullets and bombs, but economic weapons. And the battlefield is African. Now let's talk about South Africa. South Africa is not just rich in minerals, South Africa is a mineral giant. It is home to some of the largest deposits of platinum group metals in the world. And platinum is essential for hydrogen energy systems, catalytic converters, advanced electronics, chemical processing, military-grade components. South Africa also has massive deposits of chromium and manganese. Chromium is essential for stainless steel, aerospace components, and industrial machinery. Manganese is essential for electric vehicle batteries. And without manganese, battery technology becomes far more expensive and far less efficient. South Africa also plays a key role in the global supply chain of palladium, another crucial mineral for both automotive and defense applications. So when South Africa makes a decision about where its minerals go, that decision affects global markets. And it affects global power. Now imagine this. What happens when South Africa starts redirecting mineral supply away from Western partners and toward India? The US is forced to scramble, European industries panic, and global supply chains begin to reorganize. That is why this situation matters. This is not a small trade deal, this is a strategic realignment. India is not playing games anymore. For years, India has watched China dominate Africa's mining sector. China built roads, ports, railways, and mining partnerships. China secured long-term access to Africa's minerals. And China used those minerals to build the world's largest industrial machine. India saw this and learned something important. If you want to rise as a global power, you must secure raw materials. Because no country becomes a superpower by importing its future. India's economy is growing rapidly. India's population is massive. India's technology and manufacturing sectors are expanding. And India has a bold plan to become a global manufacturing hub. But India has a problem. It needs minerals, lots of minerals, not just for consumer goods, but for defense, clean energy, electric vehicles, and industrial dominance. That is why India is now expanding its influence across Africa. And South Africa is one of its biggest targets. Because South Africa offers India exactly what it needs: a stable mining ecosystem, strategic location, and some of the most valuable mineral reserves on Earth. This is not charity. This is strategy. India is buying influence. India is securing supply. India is building alliances, and the West is watching. Now let's talk about the US. America has dominated the global system for decades. But the truth is, America's dominance relies heavily on global supply chains. The US does not produce enough rare earths. The US does not produce enough manganese. The US does not control enough platinum group metals. The US is highly dependent on foreign minerals, and Washington knows this. That is why the US has been warning about supply chain vulnerabilities. Because if Africa begins shifting its mineral partnerships away from the West loses leverage, the US loses industrial stability. And America's strategic power begins to weaken, and here is what makes it even more serious. The US is also competing with China. So America is already under pressure, now add India into the equation. And suddenly, Africa becomes the center of a three-way global contest. China wants minerals, India wants minerals. America wants minerals, but Africa owns the minerals. And South Africa is one of the key gatekeepers. So if South Africa decides to strengthen mineral trade ties with India, the US sees it as a threat, not because India is an enemy, but because it reduces American influence. And in geopolitics, influence is everything. Now here's the question: why would South Africa shift toward India? The answer is simple: because Africa is changing. African nations are tired of exporting raw materials cheaply while importing finished products at high prices. For decades, African minerals have powered Western development. But Africa itself has often remained underdeveloped. So now African leaders are asking, why should Africa remain a supplier while others become manufacturers? Why should Africa export wealth while importing poverty? South Africa is an industrial nation compared to many African states, but even it faces economic pressure, high unemployment, energy crisis, currency instability, infrastructure challenges. South Africa needs new partnerships that bring investment, jobs, and industrial growth. And India is offering something attractive: industrial collaboration, manufacturing partnerships, technology transfer, refinery development, mineral processing opportunities, long-term trade security. Unlike the traditional Western approach of extract and export, India is positioning itself as a partner in industrialization. That is the key difference, and that is why South Africa may see India as a strategic ally. Because India is not just buying minerals, India is offering cooperation. And South Africa wants more than just buyers. South Africa wants transformation. If South Africa increases mineral exports to India, it signals something deeper. It signals that the global South is forming new alliances. Africa, Asia, and emerging economies are beginning to cooperate outside Western control. This is the same pattern we have seen with BRICS, and remember, South Africa is a BRICS member. India is a BRICS member. China is a BRICS member. Russia is a BRICS member. Brazil is a BRICS member. So if mineral cooperation grows between South Africa and India, it strengthens the BRICS bloc. And BRICS has one major goal: to reduce dependence on Western systems. That includes reducing reliance on the US dollar, increasing trade in local currencies, creating alternative development banks, building independent supply chains, controlling strategic resources. So this is not just a trade move, it is part of a larger geopolitical strategy. A strategy that says the West will no longer control the world's resources. And if that happens, the global order shifts. Now let's talk about the real-world impact. If South Africa's mineral flow changes, it affects industries globally, electric vehicles. If production depends on minerals like manganese, nickel, and cobalt. If India secures more African minerals, India could dominate in battery manufacturing. And that means Tesla, European automakers, and US companies face higher costs. Defense and military technology, modern weapons systems require specialized alloys and rare minerals. If mineral supply shifts away from Western supply chains, defense manufacturing slows down. And that becomes a national security crisis. Renewable energy, wind turbines, solar panels, hydrogen systems all require minerals. If supply becomes concentrated among India and its partners, Western energy transition becomes more expensive. Semiconductor and tech industry, every smartphone, satellite, computer chip, and military radar system relies on critical minerals. So when minerals shift, technology shifts, and whoever controls the minerals controls the technological future. That is why the US is paying attention, because this isn't just about South Africa and India. This is about the global industrial economy. Now some people say the US is panicking, but let's be fair. The US is not panicking like an emotional reaction, it's more like strategic urgency. Because the US government has already launched initiatives to reduce mineral dependency. We have seen attempts to build domestic mining capacity, partnerships with Australia and Canada, negotiations with African nations, policies encouraging recycling of minerals, investments into alternative battery technology. But here is the problem. These efforts take time. Mining projects take years, processing facilities take years. Supply chain relocation takes years. And while the US is trying to catch up, India is moving faster. China is already ahead, and Africa is becoming more confident. So America's biggest fear is not losing minerals today. It's losing the future tomorrow, because once long-term supply contracts are signed, they last for decades. Once processing plants are built, they shape the economy for generations. So the US is not just watching this. The US is calculating what it means for American power. India is playing a long-term game. India does not just want minerals. India wants industrial supremacy. India wants to become the alternative to China. And India has an advantage. Western nations increasingly distrust China. Companies are trying to diversify supply chains. They are trying to reduce dependence on Beijing. India wants to become the new global manufacturing hub, but it cannot do that without raw materials. So India's move into Africa is part of a long-term plan. Secure minerals, build processing partnerships, increase industrial output, expand defense production, dominate renewable energy technology, strengthen geopolitical alliances. If India succeeds, it will reshape global trade routes, and it will reduce Western dominance, because the world will no longer depend solely on the West for technology. It will depend on India, and that changes everything. Now here's where South Africa comes in. South Africa has an opportunity to do something historic. Instead of simply exporting raw minerals, South Africa can negotiate value-added deals. Deals that include building refineries, processing minerals locally, creating battery manufacturing hubs, producing stainless steel and alloys domestically, exporting finished products instead of raw. This is the kind of transformation Africa has been demanding for decades. And India could help make that possible, because India has manufacturing experience. India has a growing industrial base. India has massive demand. If South Africa plays this correctly, it could create jobs, strengthen its economy, and expand its global influence. But if South Africa plays it incorrectly, it could become dependent on another external power. So the real challenge is balance. South Africa must ensure that mineral wealth benefits South Africans first. Because minerals without development is a curse, but minerals with strategy become power. This story is not only about South Africa, it's about Africa's future. For decades, Africa has been treated like a resource warehouse. But now, African nations are beginning to realize their value. Africa has the minerals, the population, the land, the future market, the strategic location. Africa is no longer begging for investment. Africa is negotiating. Africa is choosing partners, and this is exactly why global powers are competing so aggressively. Because Africa is the last frontier of untapped industrial potential. And the countries that build strong relationships with Africa today will dominate global markets tomorrow. So when South Africa shifts minerals toward India, it signals to the world, Africa is open for new alliances. Africa is changing the rules, and the West is no longer the default partner. That is the beginning of a new era. The West fears one thing more than anything, a world where Western systems are no longer central. That means alternative trade systems, alternative payment systems, alternative financial institutions, alternative supply chains, alternative political alliances. If Africa strengthens ties with India and other emerging economies, the West loses its ability to control global outcomes. And that is why we see increasing Western attention on Africa. More diplomatic visits, more investment promises, more media narratives, because Africa is becoming too important to ignore. And South Africa is one of the key players in this transformation. If South Africa aligns more closely with India, it accelerates the shift away from Western dominance. And that could be the most significant geopolitical trend of this decade. Now the big question is, what happens next? Here are the most likely scenarios. South Africa signs long-term mineral supply deals with India. This would lock India into a strong position for decades. It would also strengthen BRICS and reduce Western leverage. The US responds with major counter-investments. The US may increase investment in African mining and processing. This could lead to a competitive bidding war for mineral access. South Africa uses competition to its advantage. South Africa could negotiate better deals by playing both sides. India and the West would compete, forcing better terms for South Africa. Africa moves toward local processing. This is the best-case scenario for Africa. Instead of exporting raw minerals, Africa builds refineries and factories. That would create jobs, raise GDP, and reduce poverty. And if Africa does this, the global economy will never be the same again. Here's what most people don't understand. The world is not shifting because the West is weak. The world is shifting because others are rising. Africa is rising, India is rising, Asia is rising. And the global South is becoming more confident. For centuries, global power was concentrated in a few Western nations, but that era is fading and critical minerals are accelerating the transition. Because once resource control shifts, industrial power shifts, and once industrial power shifts, global influence shifts. So if South Africa strengthens mineral trade with India, it becomes more than business, it becomes a symbol. A symbol that the future is no longer Western controlled. The future is being negotiated. So let me ask you something. If the minerals that power the modern world are increasingly controlled by Africa and redirected toward emerging powers like India, what happens to Western dominance? What happens to the US dollar? What happens to global manufacturing? What happens to the balance of power? Because make no mistake, this is not just a trade shift. This is the beginning of a new geopolitical chapter. South Africa holds some of the most strategic minerals on Earth. India is hungry for resources. And the US is watching closely because it understands what this means. The world is entering a new era where power is no longer defined by armies alone, but by supply chains, by minerals, by industrial partnerships, and by who controls the future. Africa is no longer just a supplier, Africa is becoming a decision maker. And if South Africa chooses India, it may be signaling that the global power shift has already begun. This is why the world is paying attention, this is why markets are watching. And this is why the US is extremely concerned. Because when Africa moves, the world moves, and this time, Africa is moving on its own terms. If you enjoyed this deep breakdown, make sure you subscribe to the Spotlight for 7, because we don't just report headlines. We expose the power moves behind them. Like, share, and comment below. Do you think South Africa should prioritize partnerships with India over the West? And what do you think this means for Africa's future? This is the Spotlight for 7, and I'll see you in the next one.